Hello, everybody. This is just a wee overview of Max. I'm sorry if I sound very blocked up. It's because I am. So enjoy my bunged up voice. Um, so getting to know the layout of Max and where all the buttons are and basically what things do is half the battle. Most of the time, you can't do something because you don't know where the button is or where the tool is or whatever. So getting to know your way around this is really important, basically. There's loads and loads of stuff here hidden behind menus and things. You do not need to know the vast majority of it at this point. What you do need to know is, first of all, these four things here are your viewports, as I would think would be obvious. The default is top view, so looking down at something, front view, looking at it from the front, left view, looking at it from the left, and the perspective view, which is like your 3D view. So if I put something in here, it'll probably make it more obvious. So we'll talk about this in a minute. But if I put a pyramid in here, you can see here that's looking at it from the top, that's looking at it from the front, the side, and then the 3D view. So you can adjust these, you can change them pretty much as you want. If for some reason, for example, you wanted another 3D view, you can go here, click on the where it says front or whatever angle it's looking at, and you can pick what you're doing. There's shortcuts as well if you can remember them. So you can change that. The other thing you might notice is that no, I don't want to set the skin pose. Where'd that come from? I've got a new keyboard and I get a bit confused about. I keep pushing the wrong buttons on it. So you'll notice here that this looks solid, and this is not. This is known as the wireframe view, and you can see that up here. If you want to see something in wireframe, there's a shortcut, but for the most part, you can just go here and you can choose what you're going to be seeing it as. So if you go to wireframe, you'll see the wireframe. Now, what the wireframe shows you is just the edges of the model, basically. So we'll talk about edges and stuff when we get to the modeling video, intro to modeling video, which will come up soon. To move around, use your middle mouse button, and that lets you pan. If you hold Alt and use the middle mouse button, you rotate round, and you rotate around whatever object you've got selected. So if I put in, let's put a sphere in here. If I select that sphere and hold Alt, the middle mouse button, it'll pan around relative to that. Whereas if I've got that selected, it'll pan around relative to that. So yeah, whenever you're orbiting an object, make sure you've got the right object because it'd be annoying. If I'm trying to look at this one and I've got this selected and then I've tried to orbit around, like it's quite hard, but it's really easy to get to where I want on here. The other thing you can do is use this wee steering wheel box up here. It's not the best, to be honest. It's kind of awkward. It works pretty much the same way, but you can kind of shortcut it by just clicking on the sides of the box. So I want to look at the right view, etc. We'll talk about the difference between orthographic and perspective when it comes to modelling as well, because I prefer orthographic, some people prefer perspective, but that kind of will affect how this works essentially. What you've got here is what's called your Scene Explorer, right? So everything you put here will appear in here. If you don't want that, you might not need it at this point. I mean, later on you'll have hundreds of objects in your scenes potentially, maybe not hundreds, but a lot. If you don't want that just now, if you're only doing like wee tutorials and stuff, and you want more space, you can just undock it like so. You can move it off the screen onto somewhere else, or you can just close it like that. And that gives you more viewport space. The other thing you can do is you can maximize the viewports. So if you click on down right in the bottom right here, maximize viewport toggle, whatever viewport you've got selected will be maximized. So I quite often will just work with one viewport open and I'll maybe jump into the other ones if I'm doing something a bit fiddly. Usually more when it comes to animating rather than modeling, but there's no right or wrong way to do it. You can also just grab the middle here and just move that. So you can have just a wee view up here, whatever. I mean, it's really like there's no set way to do it. It's really just whatever makes you happy. What you probably want to know is what all the fun stuff is though. So that is over here. So let me just delete these objects. So just select them, push delete. We'll talk about selection again in a wee minute. So here you've got your 6 or main menus, right? They are what you're going to be using the most. For block 1, you're probably just going to be using modelling and modify for the most part. Maybe a wee bit of hierarchy, probably not any motion. So you don't need to know what most of this stuff does, right? Some of it can look quite intimidating, like, you know, a sync controller. I don't know what that means. Effective moves not working. I don't know what this means. You can ignore most of that for now, anyway. What we're going to concentrate on is the Create tab and the Modify tab, or panel. So Create is, you can probably guess, how you create things, and Modify is how you modify things. So there's nothing in the scene just now, hence the modifier list. This is blank. But if I had to take a box, these are those primitives. So click on the box, you just click left mouse button, drag it onto the screen, let go, drag it up, and that will draw out your box. I'll put it back to default shading, like so. So a primitive is basically like a preset shape. So there's loads of them here. There's also more. If you go to this drop down menu, you've got extended primitives, which are basically just more primitives, but they're a wee bit more kind of fancy, I guess, like a Gengon. It's like a, you know, multi-sided thing. I mean, you can model all these with cylinders, but they just give you presets. Some of them are pretty cool. Taurus Knot's pretty cool. I don't really know what you'd use it for, but there you go. Whoops. I keep pushing the Windows button instead of Alt. It's really annoying. So anyway, that is how you create things. Say if I want to modify something, then I click on the box, and then I click on the Modify tab, and you'll see it's appeared here. And I can set the length, width, height, and the segments. So what segments is basically how many, you can see it up here in the wireframe, how many edges are going to be around it. For the most part with 3D modelling, you're trying to keep as little edges as possible, but at this stage, it doesn't really matter that much. You're just trying to get used to the software. If I wanted to turn it on here, I can push F4, and that will bring up that here. And you'll see here it says edge faces, so you can also just go in here and tick edge faces. Usually you're going to have this on when you're modelling. If you're not, it can get a wee bit complicated because you don't really know where anything is. You'll notice though that there's not a lot you can do to that box just now. You need to convert it into an editable poly before you can do anything, so I'll talk more about that when I do modelling. Anyway, that's the Create panel and Modify panel, the two you'll probably use the most. In fact, you definitely will use the most. The other things that you'll need to know just now are some of the stuff up here. You won't need to know all of this, but certainly move, rotate, scale. These are your kind of bread and butter of modelling. You know, you can't model if you can't move and rotate stuff. So that is what these are for. You can also hotkey them, so I think I hardly ever use hotkeys. So W is move, E is rotate, R is scale. And whatever object you've got, it will allow you to manipulate that object. So if I want to rotate that box, you'll see the gizmo, it's called a gizmo here, changes. So that's what the rotation one looks like. That's what the move one looks like. And that's what the scale one looks like. They all work basically the same way though. You've got your three axes, X, Y, and Z, and you'll see X, Y, Z. They're color coded and they're always these colors. So blue, it's quite hard to see here, but the blue one here at the back, that's rotated on Z, rotated on Y, rotated on X. There's blue here, sorry. So if I grab that, it will rotate it only on Z. Let's go back to move. If I grab, you can grab different parts of these gizmos. So if I grab just one of the arrows, that will only move it on Z. That will only move it on Y. That will only move it on X. So no matter how I move my mouse, it will only move on Y and X or Z, whatever got selected. If you want to move it on both, then you grab this wee box in the middle here. So for example, if I wanted it to move along and up, I would grab the Z and Y box and just move it up. So you can move it around. It still won't move on X though. So if I grab that, it still will not move on X. It might look like it is because of the perspective view, but it's not. And if you want to move it in all three at once, which I don't know why you would, but you might, you just grab that wee box right in the middle, and that allows you to move around. But it's really hard to control where you're moving it if you do that. So a lot of 3D modelling and animation is about being precise and so you're generally going to be moving things. Like if I was moving that over there, I probably wouldn't do that. Chances are I would probably go like this, just because it gives you a bit more control over where things are, especially when you're just getting used to 3D and working in 3D space. It can take a wee bit of a while to get used to. Later on, we'll talk about rendering, which is what these buttons are for. And we'll talk a bit about some of the other tools up here. But for the most part, these three are what you're going to be using, certainly at the start. Create and modify. If you have multiple objects in a scene, then to select another one, you literally just click on it. But if you're on the modify panel and you're kind of actively modifying it, sometimes you can't click. I can there, but sometimes you won't be able to click off. And what you need to do is basically just deselect that first. So you can do that by just unhighlighting it and then select another object. So sometimes you're clear to something. Why won't you select? And it's usually because you've got a part of this selected that you need to deselect. But we'll talk more about that in modeling as well. So that's just a wee overview of the layout of Max, where the buttons are. As I say, you don't need to know what most things are at the moment. This is the timeline, I forgot to mention. You don't need to know this just now. It doesn't do anything because I've not set anything up for it. But we're going to get to all this in due course. For the moment, concentrate on learning, the create panel, the modify panel, and moving things around. I'm going to make another video about a sort of intro to modelling thing, which will talk more about how to manipulate the objects themselves. But you manipulate them basically using these exact tools that you would use to move them around the scene as well. So familiarise yourself with that, and I'll get another video up very shortly, if I've got time to do it before guidance. Okay, bye. Where's the button to stop recording? Is that it?